Who's a medical doctor, unto itself that means nothing. What is a medical degree? It's very hard work, but it limits your thinking to what the AMA wants you to think. I don't think his medical education continued long beyond the medical school because he knows nothing about the toxins in marijuana. He makes no issue of the fact that marijuana is a gateway drug and a very dangerous one at that, and that the toxins in marijuana exceed the toxins in cigarette smoke. Instead, like the fool he apparently is and thinks he isn't, he says marijuana should be legalized. Then he says that suicide bombing is somewhat justifiable because it's a defense against American occupation. Then Paul the lunatic goes on and says Osama bin Laden had a point. Then he goes on and says that all the attacks against the West are because of the occupation of the West Bank. Now, only a lunatic liberal could say a thing like this. How does he explain Muslim attacks against Russians and Russia, Muslim attacks against the Chinese in the heartland or one of the big heartlands of the Muslim presence in China? How does he explain Muslims who threw acid in the face of a Christian bishop over the weekend, over the Christmas weekend in Africa? How does this lunatic explain the Muslim suicide bombs in Indonesia? These, of course, have nothing to do with Israel, but to limited minds like Ron Paul's, all of the Muslims' ire against all of their neighbors around the entire world have to do with Jews. So what does that lead you to believe about Ron Paul? Well, certainly you can't say the word anti-Semite because immediately his defenders will say he's not an anti-Semite, he's just anti-Zionist. Well, let me remind you of something. You certainly can be an anti-Zionist and not be an anti-Semite. It doesn't matter to me whether you like Jews or hate Jews. It doesn't matter to me at all. It's your decision. People inherently have hatreds and likes. What matters to me is that he's a loose cannon that is set to explode on the world stage, and it's not good for the survival of the United States of America. And I'll explain why as the show evolves. The fact of the matter is, U.S. presidential hopeful Ron Paul opposes all foreign aid, all of it, and believes that American support for Israel was a main cause of 9/11 terror attacks. Okay? So let's begin with one of his former aides, Eric Dondero, who worked for Ron Paul, and listen to what he has to say in clips 1 and 2.
He was ranting and raving. He honestly believed that that Muhammad Atta had nothing to do with this, or was at least a pawn of the CIA, or it wasn't Islamic terrorists that attacked us. That somehow, some way, the CIA was behind it, and he ran it to me personally. He ran it to Tom Lizardo, the chief of staff, and I got to tell you that our district staff, we had our jaws dropped. We were like, I cannot believe this. This is a guy we work for. He thinks that Israel is just a burden on the U.S. taxpayer, and that it's more trouble than it's worth. And he sides with the Palestinians. I mean, he thinks that they're justified in not only taking over the West Bank and Gaza, but just in all of Israel.
Okay, that's one of his former workers. You could say it's sour grapes. Let's not jump on the poor doctor, Ron Paul. You can draw any conclusion you would like. You may even agree with him. Maybe you agree that Israel should be thrown overboard and thrown under the bus, and a second Holocaust wouldn't bother you either. After all, it doesn't affect you. Why not? I mean, you can think anything you want. After all, when you have a so-called Republican saying it, what do you conclude about Republicans? He has destroyed the brand, which was already weakened and damaged. And let me put it to you another way. If the Obama team wanted to invent a candidate who would make Obama look good, even though Obama is the first communist president we've ever had, he's a crypto-communist, incidentally. He doesn't quite wear the red beret yet, and he doesn't give the salute to the red flag. But he's the first crypto-communist president that we've had. Some communists are nice, actually. They're usually very entertaining. Take a look at Hollywood. It's filled with communists. Some of them are rich and fun, very sexy, but they're communists nevertheless. What does a communist mean? They want a top-down government. Federal government decides everything from cradle to grave, and you have no power whatsoever over your government. That's a broad stroke of what a communist is. So in that sense, Obama is the first crypto-communist president. And if his team wanted to invent someone on the other side to make Obama look mild and moderate and safe, they couldn't have done better. than inventing Ron Paul. Now, we're going to play a few more pieces on Ron Paul, then we're going to go on to the other one, the sad sack, Newt Gingrich, who has made my flesh crawl for quite a while, because this man cares only about himself. I understand if I'm not for myself, who will be. I understand that. But Newt Gingrich looks to me like he'd burn America to the ground if he could sack another $1.2 million. I have never seen anyone who is as piggish, both in appearance and in behavior, as Newt Gingrich on the political stage. Never. He can't even hide it. The man even looks like he's a corrupt politician. Let's put it to you this way. If you were Steven Spielberg and you were casting around for the image of an insider, the image of a Beltway bandit, the image of someone corrupt, the image of everything wrong with the white politician of the past, could you do any better than Newt Gingrich? No, you couldn't. He is central casting destruction of the Republican brand. So let's play a few of the sound bites for those of you who now hate me because you loved Newt Gingrich or you loved Ron Paul, and we'll have a very vigorous discussion about these issues on the Savage Nation. Let's listen now to clip 6 on the Savage Nation.
The real motivation behind the September 11th attacks and the vast majority of other instances of suicide terrorism is not that our enemies are bothered by our way of life. Neither is it our religion or our wealth. Rather, it is primarily occupation.
Now, there's no difference between Ron Paul's position and that of the psychotic progressive leftists across the political landscape. But then he goes on in clip 7 to finally put a nail in his own coffin. Listen.
If you were to imagine for a moment how you would feel if another country forcibly occupied the United States, had military bases and armed soldiers present in our hometown, you might begin to understand why foreign occupation upsets people so much.
Now, this lunatic does not explain Muslim attacks against their neighbors around the globe, for example, in Russia, in China, in Africa, and Indonesia. Apparently, there are Muslim attacks everywhere. If you go to michaelsavage.com, the most recent that I can find is that in Africa, where a bishop, a black bishop, had acid thrown in his face by Muslims who did not like the fact that he was celebrating a Christian service on Christmas Eve in Africa, burnt his face off. Now, of course, you can blame the Jews for that, I suppose, if you're far enough to the left. However, if you're posing as a rational libertarian who only wants to shrink government, it wouldn't be clever of you to blame the Jews for that attack, but somehow you could stretch that to foreign occupation. In some way, I suppose. I'll be right back.
Savage.
Osama bin Laden referred to us as crusaders with a religious agenda to convert Muslims, westernize their culture, and take control of their resources. If we had targeted our response to only the thugs and criminals who attacked us and refrained from invading countries that had nothing to do with it, this characterization would seem less plausible to the desperate and displaced. Blaming Islam alone is grossly misleading.
Well, that's Ron Paul. What the poor doctor doesn't seem to understand, perhaps it's senility setting in at an earlier age than expected, is that there's a big difference between knowing your enemy, as he apparently does, and overtly sympathizing with Osama bin Laden, who is now dead, thank God. He doesn't know the difference between knowing your enemy and sympathizing with your enemy. And, of course, that shows a lack of judgment, and he's not capable of being commander-in-chief or leading this great nation. But unfortunately, the Republicans have committed suicide. I believe the election is over, personally. I wouldn't hold out any hope of Obama losing. In fact, I expect a landslide for Obama, given what I've seen, and I've tried to stop this now. Stop it. I have no power whatsoever. I'm only a talk show host. Admittedly, it's a large show and this and that, but I've told you for 6 months now, ever since these fools started in with catering to Wolf Blitzer and the other left-wing fanatics, genuflecting before one liberal moderator after another, permitting losers like Ron Paul to come out of the swamp of false liberalism, and show their Hydra heads and attack the one candidate who has a chance of winning, I knew that it would be over because they've done all the work that David Axelrod wished He could have done, but he didn't have to do it. He watched them commit suicide. And that's why most people don't even know who they are. And when they hear them, they laugh and they shrug them off as a bunch of crackpot lunatic losers. And therefore, we all lose. Okay? There it is. What do you think? Sacramento Bill, you're on the Savage Nation. Go ahead, please.
Hi, this is Bill Michael. You're right on today.
You mean only today?
No, but today's one of your really good days. Like the favorite stories everyone has about your growing up. Today, you're like the Edward R. Murrow of our generation.
Well, that's nice, but yesterday I did a whole show about the Coptic Christians being killed in Egypt and how I predicted the rise of Islamism when it occurred, while Obama and Hillary Clinton and Jimmy Carter supported the Arab Spring when I called it an Arab winter. So I think I was right yesterday as well. I don't aim to be defensive because I know you're being positive. You probably missed the show yesterday. But the fact of the matter is, even though this is an off week, this information is far too important to ignore.
I believe what's happening is you're talking about a present political reality that people do not get the information they need about.
Well, I know Ron Paul presents himself as a twinkly-eyed, friendly, kind of roguish, a nice old guy who would be fun to have as president. But if you actually listen to this man, he would destroy U.S. interests around the world and wreck us as a leading light of democracy. I mean, we talk about Obama abandoning our allies. What the heck do you think Ron Paul would do, given his isolationism? You know, this is the part that bothers me, is that all of these fools who claim to be conservatives, they complain about Obama left and right when Ron Paul's policies are Obama's policies on steroids. That's all. There's no way to add to that. When I make a statement, it's complete. In other words, everything that Obama would like to do but doesn't dare to do because he would be seen as an extremist, Ron Paul is saying he would do. He legalized marijuana. Obama probably would like to do that because most of the leftists are potheads. Just take a look at what passes for art in this country. Most of the fact of the matter, when I say liberalism is a mental disorder, it's primarily because of drug usage. Ron Paul would legalize drugs and create more mental disorder than you can ever imagine. He would abandon our allies. He would, of course, shrink government, but is that necessarily the be-all and end-all of any candidate's essence? You mean just shrink government? That's it. That's all you need to do, shrink government. See, this is, again, stupidity. Shrink government. That's the new watchword of the head-in-the-sand conservative. Shrink government, shrink government, shrink government. Easy to digest. We are broke. Of course we're broke. You don't have to shrink government. You don't have to shrink it at all. Just cut off their departments by 20%. That's not shrinking government. It's ending government as you know it. What do you mean by shrink government? Half the departments are unnecessary. There's departments that we could eliminate. Would Ron Paul really do it once he became a president? I doubt it. Why? Because he couldn't get away with it. I think what you have to understand is we don't have a dictatorship, thank God. What we have is a relatively creaky democracy, so to speak, a republic, not a democracy, or whatever you want to call it. And the fact of the matter is you have to go through the laborious process of convincing those 400 dictators to go along with your decisions. And that means buying and selling and horse trading. Ron Paul does not have the capacity to horse trade. He could not horse trade with anybody. The man would not get anything done. He would not be an effective leader. Now, Romney would be an effective leader because he's a compromiser and a compromised man to begin with, which, frankly, is about all you can expect in this world that we live in. No one is going to be a purist. Who's a purist? Where's Paul Revere? Where is Paul Revere? What do you think? Ron Paul is Paul Revere's great-grandson? Ron Paul is not Paul Revere's great-grandson. What I'm saying is he could be Mengele's grandson. That's all. Maybe we have a Dr. Mengele here a little bit. Oh, I know that you're going to get offended by that, but that's good. Be offended. Enjoy yourself. Get offended and defend Ron Paul's indefensible statements that he understands Osama bin Laden and all the attacks of Muslims around the world are because of Israel. This is right out of the mouth of a Jew hater.
Savage.